This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Durban. This show, of course, live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park in Johannesburg. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on our YouTube channel. On the show today, Patricia de Lille, the initial whistleblower, takes to the stand at the SABC Commission. Of course, is it the deal or no deal as this NUMSA strike impasse continues? We'll look at that shortly. And then also the scourge of genital mutilation on the African continent. Katrine has an interview lined up a little bit later. But first, let's get a news update.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Malan, and let's take a look at the news-making headlines this morning. Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille is expected to appear before the Arms Procurement Commission in Pretoria this morning. De Lille will become the first witness to testify in the second phase of the commission after arms deal critic Richard Young failed to testify on Monday due to medical reasons. Thousands of striking NUMSA members are expected to march to the Steel and Engineering Federation of Southern Africa head offices in Johannesburg this morning to pressure employers to accept their demands. NUMSA is insisting that Section 37 of the Metal and Engineering Industry Bargaining Council Constitution remains unchanged. A looming clash over the clause could unravel a potential deal to end the 3-week-old strike. International headlines. The United Nations Human Rights Council has agreed to launch an international inquiry into violations that may have been committed during Israel's latest military offensive in Gaza. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Navi Pillay warned earlier that Israel may have committed war crimes in its offensive against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where hundreds of Palestinian civilians have been killed in the past 2 weeks. TransAsia Airlines suspects typhoon weather caused one of its passenger planes to crash land on a small Taiwanese island yesterday, killing 48 people and wrecking cars and houses on the ground. 10 people survived. The crash came after Typhoon Matmo passed across the island, causing heavy rains. And then the 20th Commonwealth Games have officially kicked off in Glasgow, Scotland. Queen Elizabeth opened the Games last night and read out a message that had been secretly kept inside the Queen's baton. In her speech, she called on those present to unite in difficult times as a minute of silence was observed for the victims of the Malaysia Airlines MH17 flight incident. 82 of the 298 people who died in the incident were from Commonwealth nations. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Yeben, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine, and very welcome to you if you've just joined us now. The original whistleblower, Patricia de Lille, led the call for an investigation into alleged corruption in South Africa's purchase of weapons amounting to billions of rands from British and other European manufacturers. ANC's government rejected de Lille's calls for an independent inquiry to be led by Judge Willem Heath. De Lille said she was accused of being unpatriotic and embarrassing the country as a consequence of her efforts to investigate the arms deal. In 2011, President Jacob Zuma appointed the SABC Commission to investigate alleged corruption into the arms procurement deal. De Lille will be the first witness in Phase 2 of the public hearings this morning after Dr. Richard Young failed to attend on Monday. Now, SABC journalist Njanji Chake has been at the hearings for the last couple of months and joins us now live from Pretoria. Very good morning, Njanji. Thank you once again for joining us.
Good morning, Evan.
A lot is made of Patricia de Lille's appearance at the Commission. What will be so special and different, for that matter, of what's gone before?
Even I can just tell you that that initial whistleblower, Patricia de Lille, has just arrived at the hearing about 2 minutes ago. I saw her walking accompanied by one of her attorneys. You'll know that she'll be taking the stand in the short while. So what's significant about Patricia de Lille's testimony is that she's one of the key whistleblowers. We saw her back in 1999 when she stood up in Parliament and called for a judicial commission of inquiry. We also know that Patricia de Lille also referred to the acquisition of the corvettes as well as the frigates. I mean, those warships that have been acquired by South Africa, alleging bribery and corruption. There's also that much reported about certain officials within the ANC or the MPs getting those discounted Mercedes-Benz from Daimler Chrysler. So as she comes through to testify today, we should be able to hear more evidence, or actually her giving more proof or evidence to the commission as to the details of that alleged corruption or bribery even.
And Janji, a lot of allegations, and some people would equate it to hot air around these allegations and so forth. Lots of testimonies gone before. Will she be able to present the smoking gun that everybody wants to see in this case?
Yes, Eben, that smoking gun is what every South African will be glued on the TV for today. You'll recall that back then she presented what we call the Delil dossier. In that dossier, there were certain allegations that were made there with regard to certain people that took bribes or were allegedly bribed. So it remains to be seen today what sort of paper trail will she put on the table. You will remember that last week the commission saying that he or she who makes allegation has to provide the proof. So this, the whistleblowers are being given an opportunity to give the proof or to put details on the table. As you know, that this is a very high-profile investigation that was appointed by President Jacob Zuma. She also referred to the acquisition of the corvettes, going as far as alleging that one of the companies was not shortlisted, but after a visit by the former president Thabo Mbeki to Germany, that company suddenly made it into the short list. So we're expecting to hear her give more details, as well as to provide the commission at least with some paper trail as to a particular person got so much, and this money came from a particular organization or from a particular arms supplier even.
Richard Young failed to attend earlier this week. Just tell us quickly why was that and how that will proceed. And also tell us who are the other witnesses expected in the second phase and why their evidence would be so critical then.
Yes, there are 12 witnesses that had been lined up, but as you said, Richard Young couldn't make it on Monday, citing eye surgery that has just been conducted. He submitted a letter that was read via his lawyers or one of the evidence leaders here, saying that his vision is not 100%. He's unable to read documents, so it won't make sense for him to come through to the proceedings to give testimony, as we know that he's also one of the key whistleblowers as well as a losing bidder in that combat suite corvette contract. He has also made some serious allegations. His evidence remains important, but as to when his evidence will be heard, that remains to be seen. The judge on Monday saying that it's unclear at this stage whether or not Richard Young will ever come and testify here, because he has said that he will need at least a couple of weeks to be able to go through documents. He also wants to recall some of the witnesses and cross-examine them. And we know that this commission doesn't have much time even.
Janji, thank you very much for an update. An exciting day ahead for all at the Seriti Commission of Inquiry. Just to recap, Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille is expected to appear before the Arms Procurement Commission in Pretoria this morning. De Lille will become the first witness to testify in the second phase of the commission after Armsville critic Richard Young failed to testify on Monday for medical reasons, he said.
It was a shaky start to phase 2. On Monday, Richard Young, a losing bidder and prime witness, failed to testify because of eye surgery. De Lille will be the first witness detailing bribery and corruption allegations. Her crusade dates back 15 years.
The House therefore calls for the establishment of a full judicial commission of inquiry into the arms acquisition and the offset process to determine whether certain officials and public representatives are guilty of criminal conduct in their dealings with the arms procurement process.
The Security Commission, her only hope, this after a number of probes were canned, first by the Scorpions, then followed by the Hawks. 12 witnesses will be called in the second phase, among them arms deal critics Andrew Feinstein and Henny van Vuuren. Feinstein, a former ANC MP, clashed with the Security Commission over the so-called classified documents.
The Commission expressed indignation that we might have access to some so-called classified documents. These documents are identified as classified by the Commission. Their actual legal status remains unclear. This also ignored the reality that I had access to many such documents as a Member of Parliament, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the reality that many of these documents have been in the public domain for many years.
The Commission's term expires in November. Njanje Chauke, SABC News.
Thank you.
With the result?
Thousands of NUMSA members are expected to march to the Steel and Engineering Federation of Southern Africa's head office in Johannesburg this morning to pressurise employers to accept their wage demands. Key is NUMSA's insistence that Section 37 of the Metal and Engineering Industry Bargaining Council Constitution remains unchanged. The section prohibits variation of bargaining council agreements at plant level. A looming clash over the clause could unravel a potential deal to end the strike, which is now in its fourth week. On Tuesday, SABC accepted a settlement proposal by Labour Minister Mildred Oliphant to end the strike. SABC has given NUMSA until tomorrow to accept the offer. Now, for the latest on the strike, we are joined in studio by Labour analyst Peter Arling. Good morning, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Morning.
It's a lot of confusion at the moment. Do we have a deal? Don't we have a deal? And what's your view on the impasse?
A couple of days ago, we thought we had a deal, and it was between 8 and 10% increase for all metal union workers. It seems like we no longer have a deal because part of what the employers want is that Section 37 amended in the Collective Bargaining Council agreement so that they can negotiate at plant level. You need to understand that SABC represents 27 independent employer bodies, which in turn represent 2,200 unique employers.
Yeah.
Collective bargaining at that level makes it very, very difficult, particularly in this industry. A lot of the small players are marginalised under the current bargaining process.
Now, the deadline still stands for tomorrow, as I understand. How confident are you that a deal will be reached before then?
Based on where we are at the moment, I'm not that confident, unless there's a big turnaround by NUMSA, and we haven't seen that kind of negotiating ability in the unions of late. We had a 5-month strike in the platinum sector. I'm not convinced that we'll meet it by Friday. The question is what happens after that. Is it completely back to the drawing board?
That's the question I think everyone in South Africa is answering and asking and maybe a little bit concerned about, because surely our economy can't afford another protracted strike as the one we've seen before.
Well, we're already starting to see knock-on effects into the automobile industry, construction industry. So it's not just the direct industry. There are knock-on effects. A lot of the motor manufacturers are talking about plant shutdowns now just due to lack of components. We have the worst labour relations in the world. South Africa is ranked worst out of all countries, 147 out of 147 countries. Our labour negotiations are traditionally violent, marred by sort of inflexibility. And you've got to ask the question, how long do foreign investors continue to bear these things? There are automobile companies that can produce vehicles, India, China, and alternative destinations where they're not faced with these challenges. So certainly if it continues, it is going to be a big problem for the economy.
Talking about that problem, how do you see it play out in the wider economy then?
Well, I think firstly let's take a step back and ask why it's happening. I mean, union membership is at the lowest it's been. COSATU lost 300,000 members, 10% of their membership last year. They lost 90 million rand in membership fees. Strike participation is currently sitting at 4%, which is at an all-time low. So I think this is an institution that's struggling to find relevance continually flexing its muscles. And my question is, how much longer are employers and the government and the industry or economy as a whole going to be held ransom by not labour, a very small subsection of labour that actually don't represent anything but their own interests? They certainly don't represent the unemployed's interests or the youth's interests. They represent only the interests of a declining membership.
Who needs to step in, and how do we arrest this situation?
I think it's been spoken about before. We're talking about certainly some type of reform to our Labour Relations Act and Bill. Unfortunately, what's been introduced is more stringent requirements, not less stringent requirements. So I'm not convinced that it's going to change in the near term. But the question, as you've said, is what are the implications for the economy?
Are we being held ransom as a nation by unscrupulous leaders within the labour movement?
I believe so. I think they represent the interest of their membership. Their membership are older. They've been in the industry for some time. And they're threatened by the youth market. The youth markets don't have that experience, so the only sort of bargaining power they have is to come in at lower wages, and collective bargaining effectively precludes them from doing that. So if the youth and the unemployed can't compete at lower wages, really they get completely precluded from the market, and that's why we see 8 million unemployed youth in South Africa.
We do live in the most unequal society on the planet. The gap between the rich and poor seems to be widening even further. With all of this in context, how do you then, as a nation, approach this problem?
Well, I think there's a myth that the poor include those who are represented by the unions. They're employed. They're not the poor. The poor are those who can't find employment. And I think certainly the income inequality is a major challenge facing our economy. But to narrow that gap, you first have to get those who are unemployed and not earning anything into the labour market.
Job losses, is that on the horizon within this industry?
Certainly, as I said, 2,200 unique employers. Some of those much smaller employers, I've heard anecdotal companies who employ 15, 20, 25 people say that they just cannot afford this. So I certainly see retrenchments and job losses following any increases that aren't aligned with the economic outcomes that these businesses need to remain sustainable.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your unique insights. That's Labour analyst Peter Arling joining us, talking all things NUMSA strike. Is a deal on the table? Well, we don't know. We'll see within the next 24 to 48 hours what happens within the industry. Let's take a quick look now at what you're talking about on social media. Of course, NUMSA biting the hand that feeds it, says Leon Stradom. Those are some of the views. Temba says, Bradley says, who's going to be held accountable for the damage caused during the NUMSA strike? The owners who have lost money, I suppose, he says. Philemon Manganye says, Stephen Erasmus, NUMSA strike. True that I see trouble because already Nyasa was saying they can't afford the current proposal. Kasati 2015 says, the strike continues and has not been suspended. Our members at the coalface of the strike will make the final decision. From the horse's mouth, as it were. That's from the workers at the coalface, says Kasatu, will make the decision. Let's now take a quick roundup from the newspapers around the world. What are the headlines? What are the things that worry the citizens of this planet? The face of grief. A striking photo this morning on the front page of the International New York Times, as there seems to be no end in sight to the violence on the Gaza Strip. Also in the United Kingdom, the papers reporting on the announcement that the UN human rights body has launched an investigation into claims of Israeli war crimes. Also, the tragic news of the plane crash on a Taiwanese island. 48 people are now confirmed dead. Also, the 20th Commonwealth Games was officially opened by Her Majesty the Queen last night. Beautiful pictures all over European papers this morning. The Games will have superstar sprinter Usain Bolt of Jamaica and middle and long distance king Mo Farah of England headlining the sporting extravaganza. Yes, the 20th Commonwealth Games opened in grand style last night in Glasgow, Scotland. A touching moment was when comedian and Commonwealth Ambassador Billy Connolly appeared on a big screen to pay tribute to former President Nelson Mandela Glasgow was the first city to back Madiba's fight for equality by awarding him the freedom of the city 28 years ago. Ahead of the Games, Connolly spoke about his love of Glasgow.
I've played over there at the Armadillo, and there's cranes everywhere. There's an atmosphere of moving forward. Glasgow isn't the shipbuilding steel coal town that it used to be. It's a shame because I kind of miss it. Guys my age, because I'm nearly 70, and I miss the wet Glasgow, the dark evenings where the cobbles were wet and you could see the neon reflected in the cobbles in Hope Street. That's the Glasgow I lived in. But for the Glasgow you live in is this one here.
Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC3 and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader. Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC1 and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Zoom into Africa. This is South Africa. The president is Mr. Jacob Zuma. South Africa became a republic in 1960 and attained democracy in 1994. The population is more than 50 million people. One of South Africa's major languages is English. Monetary unit, the rand.
SABC News, we've got Africa covered.
Well, hello and welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Britain will introduce new laws to combat female genital mutilation, including making it compulsory for teachers and health workers to report cases. British Prime Minister David Cameron made the remarks at the launch of Britain's first UN-backed Girls' Summit. The aim of the one-day summit on Tuesday was to mobilise international efforts to end female genital mutilation and child marriage, practices that affect millions of girls around the world.
British Prime Minister David Cameron announced at the summit that parents in Britain will face prosecution for failing to prevent their daughters from being subjected to female genital mutilation. He confirmed that Britain will introduce legislation under which doctors and teachers will be required by law to report cases. A report from the UNICEF shows that while the rate of FGM and child marriage has fallen over the past 3 decades, population increase in developing nations alone could reverse this trend if intensive action is not introduced. Cameron urged countries to sign up an international charter launched at the summit, which calls for the eradication of both practices, and said 21 countries had already done so. According to a report from City University London, around 103,000 women aged between 15 and 49 and another 10,000 girls aged under 15 who have migrated to England and Wales are estimated to have undergone female genital mutilation.
Now, female genital mutilation affects tens of millions of women, particularly in the Horn of Africa, leaving girls at risk of prolonged bleeding, infection, infertility, and even death. To bring this issue back home, we are joined by Mariam Kamunya, a human rights lawyer from Kenya, as well as an LLM student from the University of Pretoria's Centre of Human Rights. Mariam, welcome to Newsroom.
Good morning, Katrine, and thank you for having me.
I first just want to start off with, let's just get some clarity and background on exactly what is meant by female genital mutilation.
Excellent. Katrine, female genital mutilation and cutting, or as I'll be referring to it, FGMC, is any process whereby you alter, injure, or cut a girl's female genital organs for non-medical reasons. And basically, the WHO has classified FGM into about 4 tiers. So without making this into a biology class, you have your type 1 FGM, where basically you have a part or the whole of the clitoris being cut off, and this is known as a clitoridectomy. And just a fun fact for you, Katrine, the clitoris is the only body organ meant entirely for sexual pleasure, so you can see the effects of that. You have your type 2 FGM, whereby in addition to the clitoridectomy, you have part of the labia minora or majora being cut. Then you have the most severe form of FGM, which is your type 3 FGM, known as infibulation, whereby they actually sew close or they stitch the vaginal opening to remain into just a small hole. And then you have your type 4, which is basically any other type of mutilation. And just a controversial fact for you, the WHO has recently included labia elongation, which is practiced in Uganda, Rwanda, Zambia, as part of FGM, and this has been hotly contested by women in Africa.
Now, can you just give us a bit of the history of this? Why is this being done?
Well, the history of FGM really is as age-old as practice as you can get, as it predates even Islam. And far from the history, what is important really is the motivation for FGM. And originally, this has been known to be a means of controlling female sexual behavior in wanting to retain virginity. For instance, I pointed out infibulation, whereby the vaginal opening is actually sewn closed. It's also believed to contain female desire, where you have the clitoris being cut off. And what is more common is also that FGM is a rite of passage.
Now, we know the summit took place in London, but would you mind bringing it back home to us? How is this being practiced in South Africa, and just how big is it?
Well, in terms of bringing it back home, in the discussion of FGM, we have what we know as the hotspot countries. There are about 29 countries spread across Africa and the Middle East where FGM is practiced the most. And fortunately, South Africa doesn't make the cut, no pun intended. But still, FGM is still a big issue in Africa, and as I've said, in the world. You have about 130 million million girls who have been cut to date. And just to bring it closer home, in Africa, every 10 seconds, a girl is facing the cut.
Now, I understand, is Kenya one of the hardest hit countries?
It's funny that you should say that, Katrine, because the prevalence of FGM in Kenya is only at 27% compared, for instance, with the highest countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, which are in the 90s percentile. But actually, the fact that people think Kenya is hardest hit is actually a good example of all the advocacy work that has been done on FGM in Kenya, such that it has then become an issue that is discussed often, and there has been very aggressive efforts to combat FGM in Kenya.
Now, what is your take on the summit and the British PM's call on the worldwide ban on FGM?
It's about time. And I'm actually proud to say that in terms of FGM efforts in Africa, we are actually ahead of the summit, because in Africa we already have an existing ban on FGM. You have the Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, which is actually the only international treaty to expressly prohibit FGM. And so in that regard, we are ahead. And it's great that this issue has made it to the global platform. And Katrine, just to point out, it has been on the global platform for a long while now, but I suppose this is a perfect example of how good use of media and social media can bring an issue such as FGM to the fore.
Now, Mariam, just to end off, in your opinion, what are the major challenges that would have to be dealt with if we want to see a ban like this become a reality?
I'm glad that you asked that, Katrine, because as powerful as it sounds, David Cameron's call for a ban really means nothing for the fight against FGM. Because, for instance, in those 29 hotspot countries that I mentioned to you, 24 of them actually have some type of legislation that's criminalizing FGM, but it has meant nothing in terms of bringing the numbers down. But it would only mean something if it's accompanied with aggressive advocacy and community action. This is one fight which you can't fight from the Capitol just by issuing a legislation. We actually need to hit the ground, be context-specific. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So, for instance, in Kenya, we went to a certain community there and they examined what is the motivation for FGM in this area, and they found that it's a rite of passage. And so the solution there has been to propose an alternative rite of passage. So the age-old adage of not throwing the baby with the bathwater out. And so there needs to be not only legal approaches taken to the fight against FGM, but you absolutely must get the community involved.
Well, Mariam, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Mariam Kamunya she's a human rights lawyer, talking about the recent UN Girls Summit, where British Prime Minister David Cameron has called on a worldwide ban on female genital mutilation. The Girls Summit also created what's being called the first Insta documentary, which is spurring international efforts against some of the darkest human rights abuses girls face every day. The short documentary, Freedom Is, was compiled from hundreds of Instagram submissions sent from around the world. The footage features users' responses to the simple question, what does freedom mean to you? Let's take a look.
Freedom is being able to be myself.
With your wife who is expecting a lovely baby.
La libertà è andare in giro in scooter per Roma.
Freedom means to me that you're free to fly all over the world, wherever you want to go.
Freedom means to you. So much. Freedom means to be free to eat.
Freedom is to free from feeling of hatred, grief and ignorance.
Freedom is when you're able to express your feelings and make your own decisions.
Freedom is learning and teaching others.
I know what it's like to have no choices. I've been cut. I know what it's like to have no voice. I know what it's like to be silenced. And I know what it's like to feel alone.
I was 14 when my mother bought me a dress and said, "Put this on, you're getting married."
We are in such a special time right now. This is a time where every voice can be heard, every opinion can be considered.
We have the freedom to choose.
Choose to help give young girls and women a choice.
Take action. Sign the pledge and end female genital mutilation and child early and forced marriage within a generation.
So that we can make a difference in this world.
Very worrying indeed, isn't it? It's something that we take for granted every day of our lives. Unconsciously, we go about accepting our freedoms and living our freedoms without thinking what we do or not do and the effects that it has on our fellow man, not just in our country, but all around the world. We are all part of the human race. We are Earth, and we should stand together and fight for the freedom of everyone, every young woman and child, their freedom to make the choices of their sexual preferences in their lives. Of course, at SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your contributions. We love your contributions. We love your pictures. We love your opinions. Simply your views and what do you think. And female genital mutilation is not something we talk about all the time. But we want you to send us contributions on that, and we'll see what you say. Now, of course, today, very much on everyone's mind still, Miss Nandi Baby says, praying for the victims of the Trans-Asia Airway crash. Hope some survivors are found. Well, we can confirm, Miss Nandi Baby, that 10 survivors have been found at this point, and they're hopeful of finding more. Edge says the China Airlines plane also crashed over Pengu Islands in 2002, killing all on board. That is 12 years ago, says. Salvage says the plane reportedly lost contact with air traffic control shortly after takeoff. Okay, what's with all these plane crashes? Well, yes, that is a question that everyone is asking at the moment. Portal Kemlu, Santi Devi says, revise their statement. There is one Indo-citizen in Taiwan who got injured in the Trans-Asia Airways incident. Of course, that plane crashed into a neighborhood, affecting some cars, and also the odd home was affected in that country. Time for us to take a short commercial break. Newsroom will be back with more right after this.
Have we seen the last of you in politics?
I don't know. No, I'm just okay now with the work that I'm doing. Let me just do one thing at a time. So I don't have any plans for politics.
Watch Question Time with me, Mpho Tsedu, Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
The Swaziland Tourism Authority invited Kaleidoscope on a media tour of what has become known as the Little Switzerland of Africa, the Kingdom of Swaziland. The Mantanga Waterfall is one of Swaziland's best known and most accessible waterfalls, as it can be seen within 50 meters.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
The shortage of nurses places those nurses who are working under such pressure.
To have one registered nurse looking after a ward full of patients, of over 40 patients, is unreasonable.
But Africa has made tremendous progress. In the year 2012, there were only 50,000 children. 50,000 children too many, but only 50,000 children that died of measles in the whole of Africa, compared to 330,000 in the year 2000.
For all your health issues, join Dr. Sello every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m. CAT.
Hello and welcome back. You're with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the news-making headlines this morning. Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille is expected to appear before the Arms Procurement Commission in Pretoria this morning. De Lille will become the first witness to testify in the second phase of the commission after arms deal critic Richard Young failed to testify on Monday due to medical reasons. Thousands of striking NUMSA members are expected to march to the Steel and Engineering Federation of Southern Africa's head offices in Johannesburg this morning to pressure employers to accept their demands. NUMSA is insisting that Section 37 of the Metal and Engineering Industry Bargaining Council Constitution remains unchanged. A looming clash over the clause could unravel a potential deal to end the 3-week-old strike. The United Nations Human Rights Council has agreed to launch an international inquiry into violations that may have been committed during Israel's latest military offensive in Gaza. UN High Commissioner from Human Rights Navi Pillay warned earlier that Israel may have committed war crimes in its offensive against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where hundreds of Palestinian civilians have been killed in the past 2 weeks. Trans-Asia Airlines suspects typhoon weather caused one of its passenger planes to crash land on a small Taiwanese island yesterday, killing 48 people and wrecking cars and houses on the ground. 10 people survived. The crash came after Typhoon Matmo passed across the island, causing heavy rains. Then the 20th Commonwealth Games have officially kicked off in Glasgow, Scotland. Queen Elizabeth opened the Games last night and read out a message that had been secretly kept inside the Queen's baton. In her speech, she called on those present to unite in difficult times as a minute of silence was observed for the victims of the Malaysia Airlines MH17 flight incident. 82 of the 298 people who died in the incident were from Commonwealth nations. Well, the best of South Africa's African and international cinema is currently being celebrated at the Durban International Film Festival, known to be one of the oldest and largest film festivals in South Africa. There are over 200 screenings of films until the 27th of July. The festival also offers filmmaker workshops, industry seminars, discussion forums, and outreach activities that include screenings in township areas where cinemas are non-existent. Joining us now from Durban is filmmaker Jocelyn Barnes, who is the co-producer of the documentary concerning violence that looks at African liberation struggles of the 1960s and 1970s. But before we talk to her, let's just take a quick look at the trailer of Concerning Violence.
Colonialism is not a thinking machine, nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it will only yield.
Well, there you have it, the documentary Concerning Violence, currently being screened at the Durban Film Festival. Joining us is the producer of Concerning Violence, Jocelyn Barnes. Welcome to Newsroom.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jocelyn, can we just start off with, can you just explain to us what exactly Concerning Violence is all about?
Yes, Concerning Violence takes its title from the essay by Frantz Fanon, which is found in his landmark work, The Wretched of the Earth. The film is based on 9 chapters called 9 Scenes of the Anti-Imperialist Self-Defense that were found primarily in the Swedish archive. This is the second film that we are co-producing with the Swedish company Story, which found a treasure trove of archival footage a few years back when we first did a film called The Black Power Mixtape. And in the context of doing that research, we also found this footage. And it's across the entire continent. There's a particular focus in the film on footage that was discovered in the countries that fought against the Portuguese colonization. So you have footage from Mozambique of Frelimo fighters in the jungles. You have footage also from Angola and with the MPLA in Cabinda province in Congo, and footage of Amilcar Cabral and others in the struggle in Bissau and Cape Verde, which is very unusual footage to find. It's something that you don't see very often.
Jocelyn, can you tell us a bit more about the team behind the documentary, who made it and what the process was like?
Yes, the filmmaker is Jordan Olsen. He's a Swedish filmmaker. The team, we in the United States, Danny Glover, my co-producing partner, and myself at Louverture Films, company Final Cut for Real out of Denmark, which produced a landmark film also called The Act of Killing recently. And of course, in this case, we have Lauren Hill as the narrator. We used the actual essay in the film. It's both narrated as well as appearing in text on screen. This was a creative choice of the filmmaker. He felt that the essay was such an important and relevant to the time that we're living in right now. We can even see this from the headlines this week from Gaza. That he wanted to actually use the text on screen as well as it being narrated. The English language version of the film is being narrated by Lauren Hill, who is actually a Fanonist and someone who was reading The Wretched of the Earth during the making of this film. We also have Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, the world-renowned scholar on decolonization and post-colonial studies, and she created a preface for us for the film. which she also reads at the beginning of the film, as a response to Sartre's preface to the book.
The message of the film, how is it relevant? You said it's very relevant today. Can you just elaborate on that? How is it so important in today's day and age?
Well, I think colonization, of course, the decolonization process was never completed. Fanon pointed out that decolonization has to happen in both directions, which means a decolonizing of the mind, not only of the colonized, but also of the colonizer. Unfortunately, we're in a situation now where we see a recolonization process, this time in the guise of corporate colonization across the world, the cultivation of certain elites who now have their boots on the neck of people across the world, especially in the developing world. But we also see the wealth disparities that are increasing in countries as well as across countries. I think the situation in Gaza this week is a classic example where you have a colonizing, occupying force in the form of Israel, claiming to defend itself when in fact what it's actually defending is its occupation. And you have as a response a population that is devastated and children who are being bombed. And so what is it that they are dreaming? The children, of course, are going to dream of violence. This is their experience. So what is being conditioned? And this is something that the film looks at, is what happens when a population is decolonized if it has no practice of freedom and is conditioned by violence. And then, so you see the relevance.
Well, Jocelyn, thank you so much. We can talk about this all day, but unfortunately we've run out of time. That's Jocelyn Barnes, filmmaker, talking about the documentary concerning violence being screened at the Durban Film Festival this week. If you're in Durban, be sure to go check it out. Eben is up next with our digital team.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine. Finally, we take a look at what's been happening on the web and online, as it were, and on our social media front. And joining me, senior digital news multimedia producers, Luvuyo Mdeni and Matiba Mtawana. Good morning, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Ewan.
Lots happening online, as always. If I can start with you, the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 and now TransAsia, It's not a good time to be flying, is it?
It's a very scary time to be flying, even. We had the MH17 flight that was gunned down last week in Ukraine. That's a story that we've been carrying on our website extensively. We've had deliberations, for example, with the UN in saying something about the flight. So we've had our correspondents like your show and Bryce Peace giving us information in regards to what's happening in that regard. So as you'll see on our website, we've been covering that story extensively. And then last night, as you mentioned, you saw it in your headlines, 48 people confirmed dead with TransAsia Airlines plane crash. That's also a story that we are carrying extensively from last night till this morning, and it's a story that we'll be unlocking as it goes.
Yeah, not just on your platform, but on our news platforms as well. All our platforms will give you extensive coverage as to what's happening. I'm sure. Let's hope that more survivors are found and not more bodies in the neighborhood where this plane crashed. But Matiba, if I can come to you back home. It's been an interesting week in the Gauteng legislature once again, with the EFF going crazy and now charges being laid against him. But we've done some interesting stuff on that story, didn't we?
Exactly. So the EFF is being charged for, they've been accused of stealing food, vandalizing property.
Stealing food?
Yes, that's part of it. There's been food missing. But then anyways, at the protest that went on earlier this week, we had one of our producers, Tembiso, who was within the protest, like covering everything from there. And he used a very cool tool that is mainly used online. It's called Vine, where you can take 6-second footage of and upload it straight onto the website. As you can see, he was like right in there. And this is what we're doing with protest actions going around the country, where we have wonderful reporters in the scene and tweeting and live tweeting and blogging from the place, and talking to the people, finding out exactly what's going on from the ground.
Yeah, at Sitole Express, he's the man, Tembiso Sitole. If you want to see those clips and what happened right there, as you can see, chaotic scenes outside the Gauteng legislature. All of these reports you can have on our digital platforms, sabc.com/news. That's where we live. Wanted to ask you before we carry on with this, Mandela Day has been celebrated not just in South Africa but internationally. Just tell us about what we did.
Now, you'll know even that in terms of former statesman Nelson Mandela, we've got a dedicated website that not only showcases Mandela's life, but also events that happen around Mandela. So that's what we had extensively on our website for Mandela Day. Now, we also had a team of which was mainly 3 people, me, Babalo, and Sipho, in the Eastern Cape. Now, we covered both national events, Mandela Day national events in Vezo and in Mandela's town of Kunu. Now, we also, during that time, followed President Jacob Zuma as he was, doing his 67 minutes. Now, we've got lovely pictures and a nice video of President Zuma's, 67 minutes, the cleanup campaign and what was happening. So there's a lot of original content on the Mandela site. That
hasn't been broadcast or seen. Matiba, quickly, you were in China?
Yes.
With the International Mandela Day. Tell us what happened in China. And there's also some interesting developments happening here in South Africa.
Exactly. So I was very lucky to be in Shanghai, China on Mandela Day. And I didn't expect the celebration to be so huge internationally. And a Chinese artist launched a 30-meter long art piece on Mandela. And this 30-meter, when you look at it at first glance, you see Mandela in the middle, and you see Mandela from the time he was born right till his death. But as you look closer to the art piece, you start to kind of see South Africa's history as well, and people who contributed to SA's democracy. Apparently, the artwork might go on tour next year, and it might just make its way to South Africa next year.
Well, we've run out of time. The next piece I was really interested in, the Zendai Modderfontein development. But let's try and get together again maybe early next week or maybe even tomorrow and talk about Zendai Modderfontein, because I think it's a very exciting development that's happening here in Johannesburg. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and I can't get to that piece. But thank you for joining us this morning, Lavuyo and Matiba, giving us a little insight into what's happening on our digital platforms. Of course, at SABC News, nothing happens if it's not happening on digital. Newsroom has been broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park in Johannesburg. We're live every morning between 9 and 10 a.m. with highlight rebroadcast at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a repeat at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show available on demand all of the time. This is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.